Hey, well wishers. I presume that all of you, your dear and near, are fine and dandy. It's Professor Suresh, delighted to be back again for my 23rd video in process of publication on YouTube today, 1st of June 2020. I presume that most of us would love to fly like birds, swim like the fish, hop like the kangaroos, have the power of a dinosaur, be smart like monkeys and hyenas, be busy like the bees, be calm like the mountain and the river, smile like babies, happy like the true saints, etc. Selected topic is glide fly like birds. We learn to glide by observing nature, especially birds, eagles, bats, albatross, and storks, etc. It is called bionics. Everything is there in nature. We need to study nature and apply it a different way, which is called innovation. As I had mentioned in my preceding videos, everything, whether it be mechanisms, electrical, electronics, chemical process, computers, etc., exists in human body by nature, created by superpower, also known as God, G-O-D, God. So a person that has an absolute thorough understanding of the human body is the world's best scientist engineer. I am a theist but not a religious fanatic. Let me proceed with the presentation. Glider is the agent noun form of the verb to glide. It derives from Middle English gliden, which in turn derived from Old English gliden. The oldest meaning of glide may have denoted a precipitous running or jumping as opposed to a smooth motion. Scholars are uncertain as to its original derivation, with possible connections to slide and light having been advanced. A glider is basically a fixed wing aircraft that is supported in flight by the dynamic reaction of the air against its lifting surfaces and whose free flight does not depend on an engine. Most gliders do not have an engine, although motor gliders have small engines for extending the flight when necessary by sustaining the altitude. Normally, a sailplane is on a continuously descending slope, with being powerful enough to take off self launch. There is a wide variety of types, differing in the construction of their wings, aerodynamic efficiency, location of the pilot, controls, and intended purposes. Most exploit meteorological phenomena to maintain or gain height. Gliders are principally used for air sports of gliding, hang gliding, and paragliding. However, some aircraft have been designed to descend as gliders, and in the past, military gliders have been used in warfare. Some simple and familiar types of glider are toys, such as paper planes and balsa wood gliders. Most of these innovations were applied basically in military to start with. We are more for destruction than construction. You know that. Glider aircraft heavier than air aircraft primarily intended for unpowered flight. Glider sailplane, a right-winged glider aircraft with an undercarriage used in sport of gliding. Military glider used to transport combat troops and equipment to a combat zone. Motor glider, a glider with a power source to generate thrust. Hang glider, foot launch, framed fabric wing, usually used for recreation purposes. Paraglider, foot launched, unframed fabric wing, usually used for recreation. Rocket glider, a rocket propelled aircraft that routinely lands as a glider. Walk along glider, a model glider with updraft generated by a person walking behind. Paper glider, a model or a toy glider made out of paper. Gimli glider, an Air Canada 767 which glided to a successful landing after running out of fuel in 1983. The first heavier than air, that is non-balloon, man-carrying aircraft that were based on published scientific principles were Sir George Cayley's series of gliders, which achieved brief wing-borne hops from around 1849. Thereafter, gliders were built by pioneers such as Jean-Marie Lebris, John J. Montgomery, Otto Lilienthal, Percy Pitcher, Octave Chonete, and Augustus Moore Herring to develop aviation. Lilienthal was the first to make repeated successful flights, eventually totaling over 2,000, and was the first to use rising air to prolong its flight. Using a Montgomery tandem wing glider, Daniel Maloney was the first to demonstrate high altitude controlled flight using a balloon launch glider launched from 4,000 feet in 1905. The Wright brothers developed a series of three-manned gliders after preliminary tests with a kite as they worked towards achieving powered flight. They returned to glider testing in 1911 by removing the motor from one of the later designs. In the interwar years, recreational gliding flourished in Germany under the auspices of Ron Rossitten in the United States. In the United States, the Schweitzer brothers of Elmira, New York, manufactured sports sailplanes to meet the new demand. Sailplanes continued to evolve in the 1930s, and sport gliding has become the main application of gliders. As their performance improved, gliders began to be used to fly cross country and now regularly fly hundreds or even over thousands of kilometers in a day, if the weather is suitable. Military gliders were developed during World War II by a number of countries for landing troops. A glider, the Colditz Cock, was even built secretly by prisoners of war POWs as a potential escape method at Auflag 4C near the end of war, Second World War in 1944. Smallest glider in the world, BRO-18 Boris, which means Lady Bird, constructed in Lithuania in January 10, 1963, American Domina Jalbert filed a patent, US patent number 3131894, on the parafoil, which had sectioned cells in an aerofoil shape, an open leading edge and a closed trailing edge, inflated by passages through the air, the ram air design. The sail wing was developed further for recovery of NASA, National Aeronautics and Space Administration US, space capsules by David Barris. Testing was done by using ridge lift. After tests on Hunter Mountain, New York in September 1965, he went on to promote slope soaring as a summer activity for ski resorts, apparently without great success. NASA originated the term paraglider in the early 1960s, and paragliding was first used in the early 1970s to describe foot launching of gliding parachutes. Although the use is mainly recreational, unmanned paragliders have also been built for military applications. The example, Altair Insect. The main application today of glider aircraft is sports and recreation. Gliders were mainly built of wood and metal, but the majority now have composite materials using glass, carbon fiber, and aramid fibers. To minimize the drag, these types have a fuselage and long narrow wings, that is a high aspect ratio. In the beginning, there were huge differences in the appearance of early sailplanes. As technology and materials developed, the aspiration for the perfect balance between lift, drag, climbing ratio, and gliding speed made engineers from various producers create similar designs across the world. Both single-seat and two-seat gliders are available. A class of ultralight sailplanes, including some known as micro-lift gliders and some as air chairs, have been defined by the FAA based on a maximum weight. They are light enough to be transported easily and can be flown without licensing in some countries. Ultralight gliders have a performance similar to hang gliders, but offer some additional crash safety as the pilot can be strapped in an upright seat within a deformable structure. Landing is usually on one or two wheels, which distinguishes these craft from hang gliders. Unlike a sailplane, a hang glider is capable of being carried, foot launched, and landed solely by the use of the pilot's legs. In the original and still most common designs, Class 1, the pilot is suspended from the center of the flexible wing and controls the aircraft by shifting his or her weight. Class 2, designated by the FAA as subclass O2, have a rigid primary structure with movable aerodynamic surfaces such as spoilers as the primary method of control. The pilot is often enclosed by a means of a fairing. These offer the best performance and are the most expensive. Class 4 hang gliders are unable to demonstrate consistent ability to safely take off and or land in nil wind conditions, but otherwise are capable of being launched and landed by the use of the pilot's legs. Class 5 hang gliders have a primary structure with the movable aerodynamic surfaces as the primary method of control and safely take off and land in nil wind conditions. No pylon fairings are permitted. In a hang glider, the shape of the wing is determined by a structure, and it is this that distinguishes them from the other main type of foot-launched aircraft. Paragliders, technically class 3. Some hang gliders have engines and are known as powered hang gliders. Due to their commonality of parts, construction and design, they are usually considered by aviation authorities to be hang gliders, even though they may use the engine for the entire flight. Some flexible wing-powered aircraft, ultralight trikes, have a wheeled undercarriage and so are not hang gliders. A paraglider is a free-flying, foot-launched aircraft. The pilot sits in a harness suspended below a fabric wing. Unlike a hang glider, whose wings have frames, the form of a paraglider wing is formed by the pressure of air entering vents or cells in the front of the wing. This is known as ram air wing. Similar to the smaller parachute design, the paraglider is light and simple design allows them to be packed and carried in a large backpack and makes them one of the simplest and economical modes of flight. Competition level wings can achieve glide ratios up to 1 to 10 and fly around speeds of 45 kilometers per hour, which is 28 miles per hour. Like seaplanes and hang gliders, paragliders use rising air thermals or ridge lift to gain height. This process is the basis and most recreational flights and competitions, though aerobatics and spot landing competitions also occur. Landing is often done by jogging down a slope, but winch launches behind a towing vehicle are also allowed or used. If we go back in time, a lot of people attempted to fly like birds by attaching fabricated wings to their shoulders, jumping off the cliff, and most of them lost their dear life. Life itself is a trial and error process, which is real life experimentation. By repeating trials, of course, with the requisite refinements, we attain the perfection at some point in time. A paramotor is a paraglider wing powered by a motor attached to the back of the pilot and is also known as a powered paraglider. A variation of this is a paraplane, which has a motor mounted on a wheeled frame rather than the pilot's back. Credit goes to Wikipedia for most of the presentation so far. Underwater gliders are a type of underwater vehicle that transfers the oceans by shifting the buoyancy, during which its wings develop a component of the downward motion in the horizontal plane, thus producing a forward force. Remember Newton's third law of motion. They are primarily used in oceanography sensing and data collection and play an important role in ocean research and development. The majority of these gliders have an operational depth of 1000 meters and a payload of less than 25 kg. Okay. The exception is a blend body shaped glider, which has a payload of approximately 800 kg and an operational depth of around 300 meters. Autonomous underwater vehicles, shortly AUV, were developed for deep water exploration. In 1989, Henry Strommel published a revolutionary article about the possibility of using a fleet of floats in the area of oceanography. In 1992, the Institute of Industrial Science, University of Tokyo, developed the first shuttle underwater glider, ALBAC, ALBAC. An underwater glider, shortly UG, is a special types of AUVs that are used in oceanographic sensing and data collection. At deployment, UGs are negatively buoyant and therefore tends to dive, during which its wings convert the downward motion into the horizontal plane, thus producing the forward force, as I mentioned before. Once a predetermined depth is reached, the vehicle changes its buoyancy to become positively buoyant. This can be done by pumping oil from an internal bladder to external bladder to the vehicle, thus increasing the vehicle volume but keeping the mass constant. Some historical facts follow. About the year 1300 before Christ, an ancient Greek philosopher, Daedalus, wanted to escape the wrath of Minos, king of Crete. According to legendary lore, he made himself a pair of wings consisting of feathers fastened together with wax, and he made also a pair for his son Icarus. They both ascended into the air. Daedalus arrived safely in Sicily, having started from Crete. But Icarus, with the usual exuberance of youth, flew too high and approached so near the sun. How could that be? Just think of the distance between Earth and Sun. So it is just a cock and bull story, right? That the wax in his wings melted. He fell and was drowned in the sea. That incident probably discouraged other would-be flyers from similar lofty aspirations, and should be useful even today in teaching conservatism in flying, because the older and less ambitious pilot did not try any acrobatics or for an altitude record and history records that he reached his goal, he or she. To Archytas, a philosopher and mathematician of Tarentum who lived about 400 BC before Christ, usually goes credit for the first flying mechanism, a wooden pigeon, according to the ancient record, flew for a distance of 50 feet. The first contrivance to raise a man to the skies is said to have been devised in 200 BC, when a Chinese general, Han Sen, elevated a man by means of kites to observe movements of the enemy. Very conventional, right? Triumph came momentarily to M. Besnier, a French locksmith in the year 1678, who invented a flying contrivance with 4 wings like planes, operated by his arms and legs. The wings, which were hinged as in a book, were moved up and down by a motion similar to walking. Besnier began his experiments from chairs and tables, and then from balconies and from low roofs. He managed to save his neck throughout these tests, which were in the nature of wing flapping glides, but he could maintain horizontal flight only momentarily, as the physical exertion necessary was beyond the limitation of man. In 1742, another air-minded French person, the Marquis de Bacqueville, built a gliding machine in which he took off from the window of his mansion, glided over the gardens of the Tuileries, and landed on the top of a washerwoman's barge in the middle of the Seine. There is no record of the nature of his reception by his hostess, of course. Leonardo da Vinci, an Italian of the medieval era, who was most versatile and genius, as he was an artist, writer, sculptor, and military engineer. He is very popular for his painting, you know that. Which painting is very popular? You know, Mona Lisa. Had made engineering drawings and computations showing flying machines very similar to our present-day gliders, as well as sketches of wing flapping mechanism. His writings, which are still of interest and historical value, were a guide for aeronautical experimenters for several centuries. His manuscripts contain many drawings of birds and designs for flying mechanisms, including a manually operated ornithopter. You know, ornithopter, it originated from dragonfly for wing flapping machine. An aerial screw embodying the same principle as the helicopter chopper, and plans for wing operating motions. About 1490, this imaginative inventor worked out the first plans for a man-carrying glider. He died in 1519 without ever having built the aircraft he had designed, but a quarter-sized model built from the artist's plans by Paul E. Garber, a modern authority on aircraft model making, hangs today in the Smithsonian Institution, USA, in Washington, D.C. Bird-like in appearance, the model is supposed to operate by wing flapping motions. See, birds. That's what the birds do. The operator lies prone upon a central beam, his body protruding through a large ring, and his head and shoulders through a yoke at the front. His arms pass through small rings, and his feet are placed in stirrups at the rear. By alternatively alternatively raising and lowering the arms and kicking the feet. A beating motion is imparted to the wings. Short glides might possibly have been made with this machine, but prolonged flight would be impossible, as a human being could not maintain the necessary rapid motions. An interesting feature of Leonardo da Vinci's design is the dihedral angle of the tail surfaces used to maintain automatic stability, a means employed in connection with the main planes for the same purpose by aircraft of today. The first successful glider, made in the earlier part of the 19th century by an Englishman, Sir George Cayley, and a number of glides were made descending at an angle of about 18 degrees, 18. He made many experiments and made some discoveries in the theory of aerodynamics and the principles of equilibrium and control of a flying machine. The most scientific development in the art of gliding was conducted by Otto Lilienthal and his brother Gustav, Germans, who studied the flight of stars near their home. They built gliding surfaces, which means by which they could hold on to them and be carried down from the summit of a high hill. The Lilienthal glider was modified a number of times, about 100 flights were made with it before Otto Lilienthal was killed because he did not move his body quickly enough to balance the machine in a gust of wind, and it fell out of control. This is the main problem even with the modern aircraft, turbulence, when they lose the stability. So they'll ask the passengers to buckle the seat belt. Even the pilots also buckle up. The death of Lilienthal had a depressing effect upon the development of aviation in Germany, but the foreign countries showed an increase of interest. The British Percy S. Pitcher had experimented already in 1895 with a suspension glider of 151 square feet surface area, reaching a maximum flying distance of 394 feet. Due to the many breakdowns of the wings, Pitcher built a stronger glider having a supporting surface of 172 square feet and weighing 72 pounds. See, this is what I said, trial and error. This design was too difficult to handle, and a third and lighter glider was constructed, with which many successful flights were made. Then Pitcher built a glider in which he placed a 4 horsepower benzene motor built by him. But before he was able to test the glider, he met death by falling during a demonstration flight before a scientific society. It is to the development of the Wright brothers. All of you know Wright brothers, right? Wilbur and Orville of Dayton, Ohio, US, that modern aviation progress is due. They were interested students of the work of Lilienthal and Chonite, and as they were practical mechanical men with a scientific as well as literal turn of mind, they evolved certain aerodynamically theories which they proposed to test out with the man carrying gliders. These were of the biplane type, and considerable data and experience obtained and published by Chonite was utilized in their designs. A year later, the Wright brothers launched their second glider, the largest glider that had ever been built up to this time. The new ship had an area of 308 square feet, nearly twice as large as the previous machine. I think you must have seen the pictures. You can check on Google. It was made purely with the wood bamboo. Lilienthal had used an area of 151 square feet, Pitcher 165, and Chonite 135. None of these pioneers would have considered such a large ship safe, but the Wright brothers had the greatest confidence in the efficiency of their control system. Some of these people lost their life when they tested their craft also, as I mentioned before. They themselves tried to pilot those machines. To better study the theories of warping wing control, the Wright brothers took up free gliding. Instead of launching themselves by running downhill as Lilienthal and the others had done, they found they could take off much easily with the help of 2 assistants who ran at the end of each wing. Lying prone in the glider is cut down head resistance. They found that after a few minutes practice, they were able to coast downhill on the air for distances of 300 feet, and within a few days they could operate safely in winds as high as 27 miles an hour. They made all their launchings into the wind. This glider, which was 14 feet long and 6 feet high, had a 22-foot wingspan and weighed 108 pounds. Their method of landing was different from the old way too. They had planned to swing their body into an upright position upon reaching the ground and land on their feet. But they discovered it was safer and easier to slide to rest on the skids, keeping the body in the recumbent or flying position. Thus was the first glider to land on skids or runners in this way. The third glider, which on September 15 was flown as a kite to test its balance, had narrower wings 5 feet wide and with a 32-foot span. These measurements evolved from scientific calculations gave an aspect ratio of better than 6 to 7, as the span was slightly more than 6 times the chord or wing width. For greater stability, they added a fixed vane in the rear, which first was 12 square foot area and later reduced to 6. The front elevator contained 15 square feet. The total weight unmanned was 116 pounds. As in the previous designs, this glider used warped wings to maintain lateral balance. That is, the rear corner of the descending or low wing was twisted down to increase the lift. But in case the wings were warped excessively, the forward speed was reduced because of augmented drag and the glider turned from its course. To counteract this tendency, the rights inched the rear vane, making it a rudder, like the modern airplanes. This gave the ship 3 controls to manipulate: the elevator, wing warping, of course the rudder. They found that combining rudder and wing warping control simplified the operation, as the rudder could be used to correct the swearing tendency due to the warped wing on the low side having more drift or drag than the one on the high side. A glider perfected at last was the result of the 1902 experiments. The two men made about 1,000 glides at angles of 7 degrees or less in this ship. This proved more efficient than the Chaunet glider. In it, the pilot lay flat instead of sitting upright. In winds varying from 14 to 36 miles an hour, the Wright brothers made glides lasting as long as 30 seconds and for distances as great as 622 feet. In the autumn of 1903, the glider stayed aloft for as long as a minute, often soaring practically stationary in the air. They spread their wings on December 17, 1903 and took off for the first time in history in the first successful airplane. Ernst Arc Decan of Paris invented a glider which might be called a godfather to the seaplane. His machine, somewhat like a Hargrave kite, was mounted on 2 little boat-like pontoons. Arc Decan's glider would lift in the air when towed by a motor boat traveling at 22 miles an hour into a 4 mile an hour wind. It often fell into the river because the laws of balance were not known at that time and was finally severely damaged when it turned over completely. In 1904, the Frenchman also made some experimental glides with a plane among the dunes at Berck-Summer. Harth and Messrs. Smith built the first glider in 1910, and this design was one of the first soaring planes of the high-wing monoplane type, in which the wings themselves were movable to vary their angle of incidence. They used a wing profile with a heavier entering edge and controlled their glides by manipulating the wings so the movement of one would compensate the movement of the other. They experimented always above level ground. In 1914, they were able to maintain their glider safely in balance in an air of 49 feet per second velocity. In the year 1916, Harth flew 3.5 minutes without losing altitude, and that in an air of 26 to 33 feet velocity per second. Then in 1920, Harth flew in the Rhône at an altitude of 164 feet above his starting place without losing speed in gaining this altitude, and that above a country having a 2 to 5 degree slope. The early gliders, frail structures of bamboo and fabric, built sometimes like a giant box kite, and as in Lilienthal's model, like an enormous bat, would do just one thing: glide down the wind from some height, and if the pilot was lucky, land him safely at the bottom. The latest machines are more than gliders. for they not only glide but some of them soar, and wherein lay the secret of the ability to remain aloft for many hours, that is, gliding, make long journeys across the country and climb. I can hear you say enough history, so let me call it a day here. Viewers who are more keen, curious for more elaborate information may browse digital information besides research articles on this topic, and UTV is another useful resource where you can see these kind of modern machines in operation. There are so many videos that you can see. If you have the capability, you can download also for free. We'll meet again real soon. Rest in peace and harmony. Always watch these videos with closed caption, subtitles for enhanced comprehension. I know I rushed through to complete the presentation within 20 minutes max. This is a time limit I had set myself to retain the viewer's attention. I hope I barely managed this time too. If not, bear with me. Okay, take care.